Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, celebrating Jaylen Clark's new standard contract. We'll talk about what he's done to earn that deal. Plus, the Timberwolves have added Tim Conley favorite Bones Hyland on a two-way deal, filling the slot vacated with Jaylen Clark. And we'll also preview Wolves-Lakers tonight. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Happy Thursday, everybody. It is a Timberwolves game day after having the last couple nights off. The Wolves are in LA to take on the Lakers tonight. We'll preview that at the end of the show, but first, a pair of roster moves for the Wolves. Jaylen Clark gets a standard deal, and Bones Hyland backfills the two-way contract slot vacated with Clark's promotion to a standard contract deal. We'll talk about both. I want to start with Jaylen Clark. We need to celebrate who he is as a player and why he's earned this spot. Should be obvious. The eye test is obvious, what he's brought to the table, but I want to dig in a bit on who he was as a prospect. My scouting report on him when they drafted him, a year and a half ago or so. We'll talk about what he's brought to the table so far in the NBA and at the G League level, and we'll talk a little bit about Bones as well. So a lot to get to on the show today. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter at lockedondaily.com. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. All right. So lots to get to here. I want to start with Jaylen Clark and give him some flowers for what he's done to earn his standard contract. Remember, when the Timberwolves drafted him in the second round, I want to rewind a little bit. This is summer of 2023, so not this last summer's draft, but the draft before. Quick history lesson is he was best defensive player in college basketball. Tore his Achilles in March of 2023. Before that, was seen by some as a first-round pick, including, I think it was Sam Vecini at The Athletic had him as a lottery pick. And the Timberwolves did too, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. The Timberwolves had him very high on their board. But because of the injury, he, of course, fell into the second round. Minnesota, remember, that was the Leonard Miller draft too. The Timberwolves drafted Leonard Miller at number 33 in that draft, and Jaylen Clark fell all the way to 53. And they took him there. And I'll read a quote here from Tim Conley on draft night in just a minute. But the Wolves, when they drafted him, decided to sign him to a 2-year, two-way deal, which is obviously allowed. It's relatively rare. We're starting to see more second-round picks that are signing these 2-year, two-way deals. And the Wolves, there's a lot of benefits to this here. One, obviously, it's a no-brainer deal for Jaylen Clark to get the guaranteed money, even if it's the vet minimum. For him to get guaranteed money, that's obviously more than a two-way deal for the rest of the season and for next year. A guy coming off a major injury, feel great for him to get that guaranteed money. It's also probably a steal for the Timberwolves. It certainly looks like it right now. This dude's what? I mean, how many games has he played in his career? 17. He's played in 17 games so far, but it really feels like a steal based on everything we've seen from him. And so for next year for the roster, to get a rotation guy locked in at a vet minimum deal is awesome for the Timberwolves. The other thing it does is that it encourages players to sign to, if nothing else, it could be a tiebreaker when guys are considering the Wolves for a two-way deal, whether it's a second-round pick being willing to sign a 2-year, two-way deal because they could say, look what we did for Jaylen Clark. You go back a little further, it was, I guess, initially not David Kahn. Oh my goodness. Gerson Rosas front office. I was looking at past drafts today. So David Kahn's name was before my eyes more times than it would be on any normal day. Gerson Rosas, drafted Jaylen Noel and everything, but that's another example. Naz Reid was undrafted, but Jaylen Noel was a second round pick. McLaughlin was undrafted. The Wolves have a recent history of rewarding these guys who play hard and earn a spot. And now Jaylen Clark gets converted from a two-way deal to a standard deal after just 17 games. That's going to help when the Wolves recruit undrafted guys when they recruit, when they're trying to sign second-round picks, to say, look what we did for Jaylen Clark. This is guaranteed money now that Jaylen Clark gets. And again, it should be a steal for Minnesota moving forward. Going back to that draft, I want to read a quote that our guy Jack Borman, who is on virtually every postcast for us this season over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and also the Locked On Wolves postcasts are posted to this audio feed. So if you're listening to audio, not watching on YouTube, a couple episodes before this, you'd find the postcast from the thrilling win over OKC on Monday night with Luke Inman and Jack Borman. Jack, of course, used to be the site editor at Canis Hoopus, does an awesome job covering the Wolves for us on the postcast side, the Locked On Sports Minnesota side. He had a quote way back in June of 23. He tweeted this out. I bookmarked it. Actually, I don't think you could bookmark tweets at that point in time, but I saved the link to this tweet because it was a great quote from Tim Conley on Wolves draft night in 2023. Asked about Jaylen Clark, the quote from Tim Conley was, quote, "We're excited, super excited about Jaylen Clark. We had him as a high first-round grade all year." A high first-round grade for Jaylen Clark. Now, most people, I think, did have him in the first round before the Achilles tear. High first round is interesting. There's obvious limitations to what he does offensively, or at least there was as a prospect. To me, he's looked way better as a pro offensively than I ever expected. I shouldn't say ever expected, than I expected to see in the first dozen plus games that he plays at the NBA level. In fact, let me do his scouting report. What I have, that my scouting report after watching Jaylen Clark leading into the draft, studying up on him, and then after they drafted him, digging even more into Jaylen Clark. What I had down for Jaylen Clark, I've done this a couple times before on the show, but it's been a while, and this is in honor, giving the flowers to giving Jaylen Clark his flowers for earning this contract. But here are my exact notes. I had, for Wolves fans, to give some context, I compared him to Josh Minott, a guard version of Josh Minott. I said smaller, less athletic, but more polished version of Josh Minott, guard version of Josh Minott. I said he's got a nose for the ball. He's outstanding both off and on the ball defensively. He finds the ball finds him, whatever, defensively. His size is fine for guarding the point of attack. He's maybe a little bit on the small side, and he has modest athleticism in order to play the three at the NBA level. He's a little small / a little bit of a modest athlete to play the three. And I think that's still true. The Wolves don't really want to play him at the three. The Wolves prefer to play big, although they've found a lot of success playing Nas at the five with the Rudy injury. And even before the Rudy injury, when they closed a couple games like that. And then I also said hard to undersell how important his rebounding and defensive IQ are. As a guard, he's an outstanding rebounder. Now, we haven't necessarily seen that in his 17 games as a pro, although he's been a pretty good offensive rebounder. But in college, the rebound rate as a guard was incredible. I'm going to see if I could real quick. I didn't have this pulled up, but I was just literally reading off the scouting report I had saved. But I'm going to look at his rebound rate so far as a pro. Yeah, it's really low. In fact, only higher than Rob Dillingham. But his offensive rebound rate is actually 6th on the Timberwolves. And if you want to, actually, it's better than that. Take out Leonard Miller and Tristan Newton. He's behind Luka Garza, who you could also pull out if you want. Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle. Then it's Jaylen Clark for his offensive rebound rate. So again, a nose for the ball. And currently the Timberwolves game plan is basically all the time we're crashing, right? We're trying to get offensive rebound. And Jaylen Clark is doing that. He's not got a ton of defensive rebounds, mostly because he's often guarding the ball, right? Other notes I had on Jaylen Clark. I had stiff, robotic shot. Didn't shoot a good free throw percentage in college either, but he shows good touch on floaters and around the rim, which is super interesting. His shot has looked much better as a pro. Very limited sample size, obviously, but it's looked much better as a pro than I ever expected. In fact, to this point, Jaylen Clark's only attempted 66 shots as a pro, 28 of them threes, and he's shooting 43% on threes, right? So I hope I'm wrong. The shot still looks a little stiff. Robotic's strong. I wouldn't say that now. He's a little stiff shooting the ball, but he's making it. And again, in college, he didn't shoot the ball well from the free throw line, which a lot of times can be an indicator that somebody's not necessarily going to, quote, figure it out. Let's see. In college at UCLA, he was a 66% free throw shooter over 3 years, shot a shade under 70% as a junior in his last year in college. So, that wasn't great, but the good touch on floaters and around the rim is positive. And then I also said, I noted he had a nose for the ball defensively. On offense, I said he's a good cutter. It feels like he might even have less offensive upside than somebody like a Josh Okogie, which is an interesting thing that I had that. But I said, I feel this early and hit this early on plus floater touch is something that Okogie never had is what I had. So, which I think is true. Like, and this was when I did this was probably right about when Josh Okogie was having like a mini resurgence as an offensive player with Phoenix. And of course now he's with Charlotte and whatever, but like he's still a functional NBA player. And Jaylen Clark, I think, has a higher upside than Josh Okogie because he showed some of that offensive upside, the touch. Albeit, he's a little bit slower, he's not as athletic, but that's the one thing I would say I feel differently about now. And I know it's only been 17 games, but I really truly feel like there's more there than I thought there was at the time on the offensive end. I think we've seen enough to tell us that that's probably the case. So yeah, I the scouting report otherwise feels pretty spot on when it comes to Jaylen Clark. I just think he's a real lockdown defender. I think he can lock basically anybody down. We've seen it, basically a game and a half worth against SGA. That's been really fun to see. I should also note on the shooting side, in the G League, he shot the ball well from outside the arc. In the tip-off tournament, he was 36% across 16 games in the G League. In the regular season G League games, he's 44% in just 4 games. And this is shooting more than half his shots from outside the arc too. He's also free throw percentage still isn't great. So there's certainly growth to be had there for Jaylen Clark, but there's a lot to like about what he's done so far as an NBA player. I want to hit briefly on potential rotation role for him moving forward as the Wolves start to get more healthy. And then I want to talk Bones Hyland. We'll close by previewing Wolves Lakers tonight. It's all coming here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off, or if you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. The Thunder game against the Wolves on Monday, you might have thought like, hey, they're going to come back. We're going to get a big game from Nas. Well, you would have been right. You had a slow start, a great finish. I don't think that's a game anyone thought the Wolves were going to come back in, but turns out they did. So maybe you're backing the Wolves for the late game rally, and we took whatever the live plus whatever it was for the Wolves midway through the fourth quarter. Maybe you're just banking on somebody like Ant to clutch 3. You'll never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, the Wolves are 5-point underdogs at LA is the line on FanDuel for tonight's game. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. All right. Closing out the Jaylen Clark conversation, it's pretty interesting. It will be pretty interesting to see what happens. We'll talk about the injury report here in a minute, but Donte DiVincenzo is listed as questionable for the Lakers game, and Randle's still out. He's actually back in the Twin Cities getting treatment. And so DiVincenzo has a shot to play against the Lakers. When DiVincenzo comes back, what does this rotation look like for Chris Finch? Now, Mike Conley's played in every game since the break. He had the finger injury before the break. You look at the rest of the rotation, like obviously Conley, Ant, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they're not coming out of the rotation. And Jaden McDaniels, I'm setting aside I know Rudy's hurt, but the Rudy's out too, by the way, against Lakers. Rudy, Nas, and the Garza guy, set those guys aside. That's 7 players. And then you have TJ Shannon, you have Rob Dillingham, you have DiVincenzo, and you have Jaylen Clark. You've also got Joe Ingles and Josh Minot kind of hanging on the fringes of the rotation, but that's 11 guys without Ingles and Minot. So what does that look like? I mean, before the season, I found this in my notes when I was going through some of my old stuff. Before the Cat trade, I had like a write-up on what I thought the rotation was going to be that I talked about in a show, at the end of the offseason, what I thought was the end of the offseason before the Cat trade, right before training camp. I had down that TJ Shannon was going to be the 10th man. He's going to play something like the Troy Brown Jr. role from the beginning of last season. Like, energy guy, wreak havoc in the opening floor, be a nice, physical defender off the bench, come in for, play your hairs on fire 6 minutes each half, and that's kind of it. He got bumped out of the rotation entirely when they had the 2-for-1, and they brought back in Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. I thought Shannon, and actually Chris Finch has said recently as much, that they brought Shannon in, TJ Shannon, to be part of the rotation. So sitting here right now, I think Rob Dillingham may lose out on some of those minutes because DiVincenzo is supposed to provide that same punch that Dillingham does. DiVincenzo probably slots back into the starting lineup, maybe not immediately, but remember, he was in there before he got hurt. Conley was back on the bench. So you have DiVincenzo as a starter. Conley goes back to the bench. My guess is it's going to depend on the night. Conley's going to get first crack if he doesn't look like he has it, which he doesn't all the time at age 37 or whatever. Maybe Dillingham gets a shot, but I doubt both Conley and Dillingham play, a dozen minutes or more in a game at this stage, because I don't think you could take Jaylen Clark out of the rotation. And TJ Shannon, dude put up 17 and 10 in the OKC win. So he's made a case as well. Now, we should also point out that the Wolves fell behind by 20 plus against OKC on Monday. So it's not like it's been all, sunshine and roses. Sunday too, right? Like it was a 7-point loss to OKC. Now it was also the Thunder. It's also one of the best teams in the NBA. So I'm very curious to see what this looks like. I think Dillingham is going to draw the short straw, and I think Shannon and Jaylen Clark will both still be in the rotation. And of course, we're only seeing Ingles and Minot in unique situations at this point. Like Ingles coming in the game against OKC to deal with the zone, and then at the end of the game to inbound. So that will be really interesting to see. Let's talk about Bones Hyland real quickly. Bones is signing a 2-way deal with Minnesota, which means he's not going to be playoff eligible. And in order to be playoff eligible, I think they could still do it, but he'd have to be on a standard contract, which means the Wolves would have to waive somebody. So the only way that's happening is if they get some injuries, serious injuries that knock guys out for a while. Knock on wood that doesn't happen. He's just a depth piece. The reason why you go with Bones Hyland, obviously the Tim Conley connection. If you're not familiar, he drafted Bones Hyland at the end of the first round with the Denver Nuggets back in 2021, and he was a solid backup for them that year. Was kind of a 6-man type. Was ultimately traded away from Denver the following year to LA. Had a bit of a rocky time with the Clippers. He only played in 37 games last year. He'd only played in 20 games this year, averaging 11 minutes a game. He was traded at the deadline in a 2-for-1 for Bogdanovic to Atlanta, who subsequently waived him, allowing him to catch on with the team, potentially play in the playoffs. Apparently that wasn't going to materialize because he ended up taking a 2-way deal with Minnesota. So the upside, clearly there's familiarity there. Conley, we're only talking 3.5 years ago that Tim Conley used a first-round draft pick on him. So clearly he thinks highly of Bones Hyland. There were all kinds of rumors the last couple trade deadlines that they could acquire him from Denver and then from LA. So yes, there's that factor. But why does Tim Connolly like the idea of having Bones Hyland besides the familiarity factor? Well, if Bones Hyland's playing, it means you've got injuries, right? Or you've got serious foul trouble and you need a high variance type guy. Like if you just have your 2-way guys are strictly projects. They're strictly guys that are, your Tristan Newtons and your, Garza the last couple of years. I'm blanking. Oh, Jesse Edwards. So the other 2-ways are not guys you're going to play unless you absolutely have to. And they're not going to win a game for you. They're just not. They're not NBA players yet. They might be, but they're not. And I know the Wolves like Newton. They waived Daisha Nix, who they liked to get Tristan Newton. Bones Hyland is a guy, you could put him in a game and he might drop 20 and you could stumble into a win in late March when a guy, guys are hurt or it's a back-to-back or whatever. That's why you signed Bones Hyland, because he can give you those high variance wins when you're not expecting it. You don't need 3 projects on 2-way deals. The end of their bench is already kind of, they've had enough injuries. You've got Joe Ingles and you've got Minot, who they don't trust really, apparently. And you've got Leonard Miller, who they definitely don't trust. They needed somebody who's got a little more experience that can go get a bucket. Even this year when he wasn't playing regularly for the Clippers, he had a 22-point game this year. He's got a career high 37-point game last year. In fact, every year he's played in, he's had at least, this year he had a 22-point game and a 37-point game last year. He scored a bunch when he was with Denver. He was getting those opportunities to score. He can get hot. He shot nearly 60% of his shot attempts for his career are 3-point attempts. He's only 36.4%, which is right around league average from outside the arc for his career. He was 39% this year on limited attempts with the Clippers, but he was only 32.5% last year with the Clippers. So all that to say, it's a high variance signing. He's a guy that can catch fire, lightning in a bottle. You're in a pinch. The only way we're going to win this game is if we throw a veteran out there that could just, throw up 25 on a random, Tuesday night in late March. That would be a valuable. Every win counts, right? So I get it. And as long as Tim Conley, I don't know anything about Bones Hyland as a teammate, his character, etc. If that's something Tim Conley is comfortable with, and the Wolves are, and clearly they are because they're signing him, I don't have any problem with it. I don't have any problem with it. He's not I don't think he's somebody you want to be a primary rotation guy, but they're not going to ask him to be. And if he could pull a rabbit out of a hat for him, then he's done his job. So I don't have a problem with it. I think it's fine. I think he's a fringy rotation guy, and it's amazing to me he's only 24 and he's only been in the league 3 years, but that's where we're at. All right. Let's preview Wolves-Lakers tonight. We have not seen the Lakers in a while, and a lot has changed since the last time the Wolves took on the LA Lakers. So we'll get into that preview here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash and non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk, rate subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 per month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right. Last time the Wolves saw the LA Lakers was not only before the Luka trade, but it was also before the D'Angelo Russell trade. So the last time the Wolves played LA was December 13th. So about 2.5 months ago. The Wolves beat the Lakers 97-87. It was a barn burner. There was no LeBron James for LA, and the Wolves still barely squeaked it out. Anthony Davis was great. He had 23 and 11 in that game. He's obviously no longer there. Lots of other changes. D'Lo came off the bench in that game, shot 2 of 10 against the Wolves. Minnesota was healthy. Anthony Edwards played, had 23 in that game, played pretty well. Rudy had 12 and 13. Julius Randle had 21 and 5. Jaden McDaniels had 18 and 9 and 5 steals in the starting lineup. DiVincenzo is still coming off the bench. Nas off the bench. Nikhil Alexander-Walker off the bench. Dillingham played. This is right around when he was starting to get some rotation opportunities. So that was a long time ago. Since then, D'Lo was traded, and then, of course, the Luka trade. In fact, the last game Luka Doncic ever played in a Dallas Mavericks uniform was the Christmas Day game against Minnesota when he injured the calf and then did not play again until he suited up for the Lakers on February 10th. He has played in 5 games in a Lakers uniform. The Wolves are 3-2 with Luka Doncic in the lineup. The Lakers as a team, though, have won 3 straight games. They lost with Luka in the lineup at home against the Hornets a week ago yesterday on the 19th, the first game after the All-Star break. But then Luka sat out at Portland, and they beat Portland. Since then, they won at Denver and against Dallas, and at home against Dallas on Tuesday. So the Wolves have one more day of rest in LA, but of course they're traveling in. Although they had the extra day in LA, they practiced at USC on Wednesday, and but the Lakers have been at home. So this is of course, late 9:30 Central tip. It's on NBA TV. Luka expected to play for the Lakers. Last time out, he had a triple-double. It's been a mini roller coaster. Started on a bit of a minutes limit. Only played 24 minutes in his first game with the Lakers against the Jazz. And he went for 14 and... Wait, is that right? Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, he went for a 14-5 in that game. And then he went for 16-4 in the next game with the minutes limit after the All-Star break. They beat Charlotte. He has loses to Charlotte. He has 14-11-8. Then he goes for 32-10-7 against the Nuggets after a couple days off. He gets a couple more days off and drops the triple-double, 19-15-12 against Dallas. And now he had a day off Wednesday. So likely he plays, although just the one day off in between, but should be at relatively full strength against the Wolves. Of course, that means a lot of the stats on the Lakers for the year are not super accurate because the team, so much has turned over about this team. But overall for the year, for whatever it's worth, they're still the number one team in free throw rate in the entire league, which they have been for years. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. They have been through the last several years. They're a top 10 offense, and they're 11th in defense. So for the season, I did this the other day when I was talking about predicting the Wolves would have a top 10 offense when it was all said and done. The Wolves, by the way, are up to 13th. They were 14th at the All-Star break. On cleaning the glass, the Wolves have the 13th ranked offense in the league. The only teams that have a top 10 offense and defense are OKC, Cleveland, Boston, Memphis. That's it. Lakers are the next closest thing with the 10th best offense, the 11th best defense. They are good at everything offensively, pretty much. And this is season long statistically without Luka for most of it. Defensively, they're a poor defensive rebounding team, and they don't force turnovers. They're just not a very athletic team, and that has trended further in that direction with by trading away Anthony Davis. Now, of course, they picked up some other pieces that are important for what they're trying to do. They become a little bit more athletic in some ways, but overall, the concern for the Lakers moving forward is how are they going to defend when teams can hunt either Luka or LeBron, which is a weird thing to say, but given LeBron's age, it's not. Dorian Finney-Smith has been a huge addition for them. Jared Vanderbilt's back playing. But they're not a very deep team. They're very reliant on LeBron and Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, and to a lesser extent, Rui Hachimura. It's a good team. Obviously, they've got a better record than Minnesota. They're favored by 5 points on FanDuel, as I mentioned earlier. But I actually the matchup isn't awful for Minnesota. I'm curious to see how they handle Luka Doncic. Obviously we saw what happened in the playoffs last year. I'm curious who they decide to stick on Luka and just kind of see how it goes. Right. And the Wolves have plenty of options to do it. I think Jaylen Clark he's undersized, but he's got the body type and the toughness. I just think he's going to get into foul trouble immediately if he's gets put on an island with Doncic, as he did against SGA in Minnesota on Sunday night. He was in immediate foul trouble and didn't come back until the third quarter when he got hurt. And thankfully was able to then play again on Monday night at OKC. So that'll be interesting. I mean, you still got to put somebody on Austin Reeves. He's the other one who's going to generate offense off the dribble for them. So maybe that's Jaden McDaniels. Maybe it's Nikhil. They'll probably rotate through those two guys. I don't really know how they handle LeBron. I mean, he functions as a center most of the time he's on the floor anyway. Jackson Hayes starts for them, but especially with no Rudy in this game. Remember, no Rudy Gobert. No Julius Randle. DiVincenzo and Ant are both listed as questionable as of Wednesday afternoon. So if Rudy's not playing, we probably see less Jackson Hayes, probably more Jared Vanderbilt, and more smaller lineups with LeBron essentially playing the five or playing in the front court with Hachimura. So I don't hate the matchup for Minnesota. They've won 2 out of 3 games against the Lakers so far this season. The barn burner 97-87 win over a shorthanded Lakers team in mid-December. They also crushed them by 29 at home in a game LeBron did play in. And then remember, opening night in LA, the Lakers won by 7 and the Wolves played terribly. So again, I kind of don't I think the Wolves will be okay. I know they're underdogs by 5 points, but I would maybe take the Wolves +5. This feels like a good spot for Minnesota. It just has that feeling. I don't know exactly why. And remember, Minnesota's offense, they've been drawing fouls like crazy. They shot 37 free throws against OKC the other night. So I think Minnesota's going to get to the line a bunch. Even though the Lakers, for the most part, do a pretty good job defending without fouling, I think Minnesota is going to kind of get what they want against this Lakers team with no Anthony Davis. So it'll be interesting. We'll have the live postcast, of course, following the game late Thursday night. You'll get Luke Inman and Jack Borman over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. And if you can't watch it live or if it's too late, you can listen to the audio right here at Locked On Wolves. And then I'll be back Friday with my regular postgame pod. So you have both Jack and Luke to listen to, and then myself on Friday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, you can subscribe to Locked On Wolves daily newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.